All right, everyone, welcome to Tuhon and Son. Yeah, it's been a little while. So, yesterday on Facebook, I was just like, hey, we're recording an episode. Does anyone actually have any questions and stuff like that? And I was delighted when Claudio DL said, I have two questions. One, what motivated GM Phil? And that's Grandmaster Phil, so you get some mad props in this message right away. What motivated GM Phil to take up the major task of putting together the Kajukenbo family tree? And the family tree is a history within itself. You were making this before you had a real computer. You were doing this with a typewriter, some glue, and some astronomical patience.
Yeah, actually, well, what happened is I had a very good friend of mine, by the name of Leonard Indrisi. I met him in 1977, and he walked up to me at a karate tournament. I lived in Montreal. Kajukenbo, one of the arts I started practicing, wasn't very well practiced all around the world. I mean, the 70s was, martial arts exploding, and, Kung Fu, the TV show and everything. Everybody kind of knew more about martial arts, but it really didn't have the kind of press that it has now. Nowadays, you can get just about any martial art in any corner of the world, but in those days, things like Kajukenbo were pretty rarefied. Anyway, so I was sitting in a tournament, and this guy walks up to me and goes, "Hi, are you Philip Jelena?" And I went, "Yeah." And I had no idea who this person was, so I was like, "Oh my God, do I owe money?" Anyway, so of course that wasn't the case. But what happened was he introduced himself as Leonard Indrisi, and that he was a Kajukenbo practitioner from Denver, Colorado, and he'd been sent up to open a school by one of the Kajukenbo guys, a guy named Valdecascos. As we got really good friends, he started showing me more and more paperwork that existed within the system, because the system had been around for quite a few years by that time. And one of the things he showed me was a family tree that had been made by somebody as a project for their black belt in, I guess, early 70s. And it was a piece of paper, and it had some names on it. It was, ironically, it had about 160 people on this thing, and half of them were either inaccurate or wrong. And I know this guy just was doing it as a temporary thing. Like, oh, I have a project to do. I'm going to do this project. I'm going to just go and ask my friends at my karate tournaments and ask them, do they remember who was who? But it just became this ridiculously small thing. Mm-hmm. And all props to the guy. But I just said, no, there's got to be a better way. It's got to be, because one of the things, my family had always been really into family history. We knew where we came from, who we came from, when we arrived. And that just seemed, when people, in the early... Yeah.
Beyond grandmother and grandparent, I have no idea.
We have a history.
Okay, anyway. Well, that's the next episode, is you're going to unveil the history of the Jelena legacy.
Well, it's
now back to the tree.
Anyway, so I made a letter, and I started sending it out to people. And I'd gone around, and I tried doing as much as I could. I would write a letter. In 1975, I had the pleasure of meeting Adriano Emperado, Sergio Emperado, the founder of Kajukenbo. But he was not very forthcoming, because, when you know everybody, it doesn't seem important to have it all on a list somewhere. You just know them all. But for the rest of the world, people like me who lived so far away from the center of that universe, it just seemed like, wow, this is a really good idea, because there are people in Europe, and there are people in Hawaii, and there are people in the United States and in Canada, and if we knew where we were and who we were, we would, first of all, it'd be very difficult for somebody to pull a wool over our eyes and say, yes, I'm a Kajukenbo guy, and no, you're not. And more importantly, it would kind of tie together that long lost group of people. If somebody goes somewhere and, say, wow, I'm somebody, this person, and you go, well, I don't know who you are. And then this way, it just seemed like that wasn't my plan, but it eventually became that. Mm-hmm. And so, as you're saying, you're right. I had a typewriter and some scissors and some glue, and I would get large pieces of paper, graphic paper.
Unfortunately, a cat too, but we'll get to that a little later.
Cats like playing with little pieces of paper. And I would get all these lists of names that I had, and I would start grouping them together. I would start off with the people at the top who started, the very first guys who started in the 50s, and their students, and then their students, and it would just sort of trickle down. One generation would trickle to the next. And it was very interesting, because I got to meet people I otherwise never would have met, because I'm a very shy person. So I'm not going to just walk up to you and go, hey, man, how you doing? Here, you do Kajukenbo. They'd look at you and go, yeah.
Want to be in my tree?
Or I want to be in my gang. But yes, actually, that would be a very good way of breaking the ice. I would say, my name is Philip. I've been doing this family tree. And Sergio Emperado signed off on it. He said it was a good idea. He liked the idea. And so he supported me. Now, you realize that some people don't really like each other. And some people had done things. I mean, some students had done things to teachers, and teachers had done things to students, financially, physically, whatever. And so there were a lot of people who did not necessarily get along with each other. And that was a bit of a surprise for me because I had this rosy view of the world that said everybody was successful every time, doing everything always.
The family tree was this thing in your head of everybody holding hands, singing and jump kicking to It's a Small World.
Yeah, pretty much. And then I had to kind of adjust that vision as I started realizing. I mean, at some point...
Getting more jaded.
Well, I was told, rather to my shock and surprise, that originally in Kajukenbo, in Hawaii, Emperado himself was a member of the harbor police, and he'd been a police officer. And there were a lot of police officers that were in Kajukenbo because it was a very effective fighting art. And in Hawaii, if you were a cop, you were going to fight somebody some point in time. And so what happened was that these guys had trained it. But in the 60s, where the production of marijuana was a very big thing, they found in Hawaii there were a lot of people who were producing marijuana who were also training in Kajukenbo. So one time they had a huge bust, and of course everybody knew each other. So it was kind of it was one of those kind of slightly awkward situations. I mean, I wasn't there, so I only heard about it. So my perceptions of it are, of course, could be very skewed. Mm-hmm. But I got to meet all sorts of people, and to this day, I mean, I've been doing it now consistently since about 1988. That's when I first started doing it. I didn't do it any earlier than that because I really didn't know the people. I hadn't been to California yet. I hadn't done all these things. I hadn't met them. And I'd run into people in Los Angeles when I was training, and I'd ask them, "Oh, do you know such and such in San Francisco?" And they'd look at me going, "No." And it just seemed to be very like, "Oh, wow, that's really strange. You live only a few hours away from each other, and you don't know all these people, everybody."
Not such a small world anymore, is it?
Anyway, so I put together a letter. Cedro had created something called the Emperado Kajukenbo Association to basically act as a support group for him. And I, in my naivete, thought, well, I'll just make a family tree and everybody will participate and it'll be so easy. Not so fast. Yeah. Anyway, so I would go and I started realizing that people didn't like each other, and they, in fact, in some cases, hate each other's guts and wouldn't help each other. They wouldn't cross the road to give them a dime. Yeah. And but it was a very interesting thing because then I started finding out, the truth of the politics, which are in everybody's lives. Every family has politics. And I started realizing, and I started meeting people, and I started becoming... I started developing a very thick skin because, of course, I would hear stories from one person about another person, and I heard stories about somebody else about that same person who told me that story. And for some reason, they weren't the same story. One guy who felt he was the wrong person, and the other person felt that they were the wrong person. And, of course, together it's kind of like when males and females break up. Was it because she was looking at that other guy, or was it because he was looking at that other guy, or was it because she was, she thought, she wanted to do this, and there's a million reasons why people break up, and it's the same with martial arts schools. You may have been with a school for 20 years, and you want to do something else, but your teacher told you, no, ours is the only school of true value in the whole wide world. And meanwhile, of course,
sounds a lot like a religion, actually.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of martial arts are. A lot of martial arts, they see the instructor as being absolutely perfect, and nothing. His kicks were perfect, his punches were perfect. When he would think of hitting you, you would fall down. Stuff like that. A lot of kind of that nonsense exists in the martial arts world, as in every other world. That was one good thing about the advent of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it kind of like brought everybody to a reality that there's something that could beat you. But very soon after the advent of the UFC, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys are not guaranteed to win anything. I mean, you can walk there and you can see the guy who's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu almost was a guarantee of a win. Nowadays, it's, okay, then he's okay. It's not like having something absolutely absurd. So
the bar is raised.
Yeah, the bar is very much raised. I mean, originally wrestlers were, obliterated by Jiu-Jitsu guys. Now, the opposite can be true. Not guaranteed. It's the quality of the person, not the quality of the art. But anyway, getting back to the family tree, I just started doing more and more.
He said, she said.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of that.
Yeah.
I started meeting more and more people, and even though I would get the family tree from one person, about 2 or 3 years later, I would get a huge update of that family tree from that same person because, quite honestly, they didn't trust me as far as they could throw me. And, they would say, yeah, I'll give them the names that everybody knows. But most of the time, they didn't realize there was nothing in it for them. Mm-hmm. And because there was nothing in it for them, they thought to themselves, well, what on earth would I want to do this? And so they didn't do it. And so I now get updates from people. People are very nice. They, they realize that, I do have some rules.
What are these rules?
Well, that you have to have, if you're a black belt, you have to be at least 16 years old to be recognized as an adult black belt. It's not a black belt of children. It's a black belt of adults. Because when children get black belts, I've seen so many kids who at 11 and 12 years old got black belts, and then at 13 or 14, it would be bored, and they would never stop. They would never do it again. So in some schools, the transition is very normal. They've been there all their lives, and then they become adults at that same school.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
But there is such a thing called natural talent and people who will absorb the skills, and then people who will go through the motions, and then, there are tons of books I've read in my life that I could not tell you a single line from, like information, especially to a child or something like that. If they don't stay with it, it's just that other thing they're learning at that time. There are things I could do when I was a kid I cannot do now. I used to draw amazingly before you guys got me glasses. Yeah.
We remember.
Yeah. I used to win coloring contests. Today I can't draw a straight line. I used to be able to run, Dad. So I don't know. This is a huge off tangent, but whatever. If a kid gets a black belt, so be it. But it doesn't qualify on your family tree, and
exactly.
that is
what we try to, because there are people. The one thing, if somebody tells me, for example, instructor A says these are my black belts, those names will go down. I can't do anything about that. But sometimes I'll get people who'll say, "Okay, put this guy down on my black belt tree." And I do. And a year or so later, I get an notification saying, "Take this guy off my tree." Well, why?
I don't like him.
Well, no. He never got his black belt. Well, why did you tell me he got his black belt? Well, we thought he was supposed to show up. Basically, they would tell the people who were going to get their black belts in anticipation. But the guy never, like a projection. Yeah. And that, the person never got their black belt. And people don't understand it. When you get your black belt is when you should put the name down. Not in anticipation, not in whatever, because my basic philosophy is that once a name is on. It's indelible. It doesn't come off. Yeah, but I don't like him anymore, and he's not that good a person. I said, well, then you should have figured that out before you gave him his black belt. Not because the person is a bad person, but because you should know who these people are. You're giving these people a rank. You are saying that these people have your seal of approval. How can they have their unseal of approval within a year? So in my mind, it's kind of like in a university. If I get my bachelor's degree or a master's degree or PhD from any university in the world, unless I have cheated in some way, they cannot rescind that. They can't say, "Oh, we gave you your bachelor's degree, now we're taking it away from you." Well, why? Because you said some bad things about this professor. Say, well, so what? Maybe that guy deserves to have something said about him. I don't know. But the reality is that once you have passed that line in the sand, that thing that says, "I'm a black belt," once you've taken that exam, or once that your certificate has been handed to you, you cannot rescind that information. We will we'll do things. For example, if somebody comes, let's say you're an instructor, and you've met some people who want to train under you, and they no longer want to train under their old instructor for one reason or another. Maybe they died or whatever, we don't know. And so then they start training under you. Well, then after a while, once they start getting rank from you, then they will be put under your family tree, but under a solid line, indicating they are now training under you, but having got their black belt somewhere else. Or we will have a dotted line, which means the opposite. Having got their black belt from this person originally, they are no longer affiliated with them. Either the instructor has broken a connection or the student has broken away. Either way, there is a desire not to be connected. And so, fine, we indicate it by a dotted line. The dotted line says, though the ranking was achieved, this person no longer affiliates with this person. And so as I said, it's either the instructor designates that or the student designates that. Okay. Of course, there are some people who, some students go, what? Why am I under that dotted line? I said, well, your teacher told me he no longer has anything to do with you. And the student sometimes, this is when you find out. But I can't do anything about that because my responsibility is to list the people who are the names, and then secondarily list them if they're connected. If they're not connected anymore, then, for example, if I'm no longer connected to my instructor because he's kicked me out, then I can't put people down. So they would have to somehow become somebody. Maybe connect up with another instructor if they need that, or they can do it on their own.
Completing the first one, like, were you nervous? Where you're putting it out into the world, and you're like,
no, actually, I was just so excited people would see it because I had this the original family tree that said, hey, this isn't very good. There's got to be better than this. I mean, because as I said, I had an extensive background in my own family history. I mean, when we used to live out in Hudson, we would have pageants, and my mother and my aunts and my cousins and my sister even, we would all get dressed up in clothing from 150 to 200 years ago when we arrived there.
I don't even know what our bloodline is. Like,
anyway, so we
you came from my like, I don't
your
know.
loins.
Yeah.
My loins.
Son, you came from my loins. That's all you need to know.
Well, no, it just. Yeah. But we would.
Where'd you come from, Dad? Grandpa's loin.
Exactly. Well, yeah. But anyway, so this was always part of our history. So we never thought of it as something needy. But at the same time, when we started Family Tree, when there was no Family Tree, there was a very good reason to do it, and so I started doing it. And now it measures 36 inches high, 56 inches wide. We have approaching about 5,000 names on there.
And comparatively, the amount of names went up every year, I guess, as the martial art became more popular.
Well, that, and there's a lot of things that happen. I mean, sometimes people just can't be bothered to give you the information. I get an email, I'm sending you my information, and I would never hear from them again.
Yeah.
I couldn't harass them. If you harass people, they get upset. They start thinking that somehow.
This is pre-internet when you started doing this, so
I know.
This was all by mail and phone call.
Well, exactly. So I mean, I wasn't about to. I mean, and phone in those days. I mean, now that the internet is there, of course, phone prices are down. Yeah. But in those days, companies like Bell Canada used to make a lot of money from allowing you to speak to somebody a few hundred miles away, and they would charge you for that experience. Nowadays, I get to pay 3 cents a minute anywhere in North America. So I could spend an hour on the phone and I would spend $1.80.
I remember when you got the computer. I'm guessing that this is a prime reason why we got a computer in the first place.
I would say you're right.
Yeah, definitely. Because
it was a Macintosh 605.
I remember typing on a computer for the first time and being like, wow, it's like in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we had but my
well, you still were gluing it together though back then because the programs were very primitive. So you would type it out, print it out, and still glue it, but not typewriter, and it was still quite a process.
Well, the typewriter thing was a problem because I have big sausage-shaped thumbs, and which means I don't type very well, and all you need is one error, and the whole thing would have to be redone. Yeah. So now having a computer to type it out and put it was the advent of the. I started. I don't remember exactly when. 1997, 98. I got my first program to actually work on this thing called PageMaker from Adobe, and it had a large format, so I could actually.
This is 10 years after the fact of you
10
starting.
years after, right, exactly. Yeah. So I did a lot. What I would do is I would do that, and I would bring the completed work to an architectural firm, and they would make a kind of a negative, and then they would produce copies that smelled like ammonia, because that's how they produced large scale designs. Yeah. And literally, I'd bring these things down to California with me, smelling like ammonia, and and
there's that Canadian guy smelling ammonia.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you do down up there in Canada?
Eventually, I started finding places where I could get them printed. Since I've done that, things are much easier.
Just compelled to the humanity of everyone listening and stuff. They're probably like, I could do that. Tell me, what was the worst hiccup in the process of making a family tree that still rings to this day? You have your hand covering your face, you're reliving a Vietnam memory or something.
Well, what happened? As the PageMaker program was very good within a certain degree, but I had limited knowledge about how to use it. So one of the ways that they keep these programs working is they have something called layers. Mm-hmm. So you have one layer, you can put one thing on, you have another, but I was putting everything on the same layer.
Oh.
So I had all of my graphic stuff, all of my writing, all of my photographs.
So you got to space everything pretty much. Like,
well,
go this line, space, 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 this line, space, space, space.
Well, pretty much, but it wasn't so much that. What would happen is that there was so much information on one level that the computer itself couldn't handle it. So what it would do, it would just like corrupt certain files. It wouldn't tell you that it was going to corrupt these files. It just, when you printed it, you'd see these black squares, and you'd be going, no. And so I think one year I was there, and one guy came around and said, "What happened to my names? They're all blacked out." I went, "Oh, well, yeah." And so he said, "Well, why didn't you put it on different layers?" And like that little light bulb goes on in your brain. Layers. Ooh.
But there's been some other mishaps. Like, tell them about the cat.
Oh, well, that one time we were. I put all of the names.
Well, it's just to paint a picture for everybody, because here we are, like, yeah, remember that? Yeah. But there's like a zillion people on the internet who are like, what the hell are you talking about? We had the living room we used to have this one big room that we divided between the dining room and the living room, separated by a couch. And Dad would occupy the dining room, like spread out across the entire floor, going through the names and putting the names on, stuff like that, like meticulously, day in and day out. For how long would it take you on average?
I would start in March to be ready for July.
Yeah, there you go. Important information. Now, we had a cat.
Who liked playing with little pieces of paper.
Yes, elaborate, Father.
Well, Shadow, that was Shadow, and we...
God rest her soul.
Yeah.
She's tattooed painfully on my chest.
We had all these papers on the sheet, and I'd see the various names, the various black belts under Emperado. That would be the first level, and I have them down. And so I'd put that, and then I'd have to draw a huge line with a ruler, and I would draw a ring line, and then I would have that name, that group of names over there. The cat would come along and start playing with them. And because the cat was playing with them, they would go all over the place. And of course, I couldn't actually tape anything to the paper right away because I didn't know how it would look. Because if something was off balance, it looks ridiculous. And so I went through many. I don't know if I wanted to strangle the cat or just.
Which, just to note, you never did.
I never did, no. But the cat would be there, and it would just come in. Other times when it didn't want to play, it wanted to be petted, so it would sit there in the middle of everything
and just get
plop down,
back.
get on its back and roll around, and like flick its very furry tail and knock some names around. Yeah, lots of fun.
Yeah, we had turtles too back then, but by default, I guess they were your favorite because they didn't screw up your family tree. All right, so now let's go off on this topic. Something a little positive. What was the moment you said, "This is awesome, and I can never stop doing it"?
Well, you started realizing that it's gone from something that you thought may have become an obligation to an avocation to it's something that I feel obliged to do now because I think people keep telling me that it's worth doing, that it really positively affects what they're doing because we have a very far-flung style. And when you have something that this far-flung, it's kind of funny because I've been threatened a couple of times. Oh, you'll have to put it there because, I'm recognized by this person. And I said, look, until you actually can produce a black belt certificate from the guy that is now dead, that you said you learned from, that all of his students say that they don't know who the hell you are, you're not going to go under that person. You can't. I have to justify. I mean, if instructor A tells me that he has got a list of 20 people and these are all of his black belts, period, then I'm going to accept that word. Now, if I have a certificate signed by that person saying that this person is, yes, whatever, received a black belt from me. But so many times, you see, what people would do is that they would, I was in a good friend of mine, Gary Forbach's house in California back in the whenevers. He showed me a couple of things. People from Europe would say that they had received a rank from his instructor. And his instructor had never been to Europe, at least not that he knew about.
Yeah.
And he would see the certificate, and he would recognize the certificate because it was a certificate that had belonged to somebody else that he knew. And it turns out that what people had done is they'd taken a photocopy of a certificate, whited out the person's name, and put their own in. And, it's kind of, and ironically...
How low can you go?
Well, the con artist game is a long-standing thing. Some people, just because somebody's a con artist doesn't mean they're very good at it. Mm-hmm. But, you see a lot of that. There's an awful lot of people out there who who claim to have things that they've got a thing in the United States called stolen valor, where people actually go around claiming to have been in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, or the Marines, and have no validity to have done it. There was a guy recently who was claiming to have been a Navy SEAL, and not only that, had claimed to have won the Congressional Medal of Honor twice. Now, there's actually a rule there that says you can't win it more than once in your lifetime. But in the old days, you could. I think the last person that did it, I'm not sure. I have no idea. There's a guy named Major Smedley, who was a guy in the United States Marine Corps who did win it twice back in the First World War.
Ah, Captain America. Okay.
Okay, but the thing is, you can't win it. I mean, and the thing is, nothing infuriates people more, because Americans take that stuff really seriously. If you win a Medal of Honor, your children can go to the West Point, or the the Air Force Academy, or Annapolis, which is a Navy one. You can go anywhere of those places without competition, which means you basically have not a free pass, but you have to get in. But they take this stuff, they take the Medal of Honor really, really seriously.
Oh, and they should. They don't just give it to anybody.
They don't give it to hardly anybody ever anyway.
Yeah,
but the very
you
fact,
can't buy a Medal of Honor.
Well, as a matter of fact, ironically, you cannot buy it. It's illegal to sell it.
Wow.
That is how seriously they take it. I mean, for example, in the British system, they have something called a Victoria Cross, but they are for sale, and they're the property of the people who own them. And I mean, nowadays, when they sell for upwards of $300,000 or $400,000. But the American ones, but people will, I mean, sometimes you can, of course, you may not be able to sell it, but it can be given to you. A lot of children own the one that their father may have won.
Yeah.
And their father would have won it and maybe passed away before it went into a museum or anything like that. It stays in the family.
Yeah,
there's
they
no
can't
obligation.
pawn it for crack.
They can't. No.
No. Okay. Good.
But anyway, but that type of thing, the idea of people counterfeiting things to put themselves in a position is very, very big. I mean, which is why
if they counterfeit it, they're like, oh, I can open up an academy. And people will say, oh, wow, I can't wait to train under this guy. Look, he has this certification.
Well, I mean, one of the things we've noticed, ironically, was that, on YouTube, which is now, it's the spreader of this kind of Yahoo information. But there's some guys that you can see that, claim to have, be black belts in Italy. We have no black belts in Italy. But they claim to be black belts in Italy, and they do their stuff. And they're not bad martial artists. They're just not Kajukenbo black belts.
Yeah.
And you see, there's the downside where people will claim to have something, and they will be successful financially. And then there will be people who are high-ranking who will go in there and kind of say, yeah, but I'll adopt you. Mm-hmm. And then you can say you're under me, and you can give me money for that.
Yeah.
And so there's a downside to it, but at least we can say to somebody, that person that you are claiming as yours is full of it, right? You understand that. We all know that you're full of it. And people get all upset. Well, no, I'm a high-ranking guy and I can accept people. I said, yeah, but you're accepting a guy who's full of it. He's BS. He doesn't know how to do the techniques. He has no skill.
All right, so we got to end this one on something positive.
Okay.
Because I'm like, hey, something positive. And you're like, so much fraud.
Oh, okay, no, okay. But the thing is...
But okay, that moment, though, like, what was something that sticks out in your head where someone went up to you and said, that'll do, pig, or something, like from the Babe moment, where you're just like...
I mean, I don't do it for the thanks, but it's kind of nice to get them. People say, thank you very much. What you're doing is a positive effect on what we do. I mean, it's intangible. It's the way people come to you and go, wow, that's great. It looks like awesome. I mean, when they see what they are, just one name in the sea of names, they realize that this is something that's grown from a very small group of people in Hawaii from 1947, 1949.
Yeah.
That was the genesis of what we're doing. And now it's being practiced all over the world. I mean, there are people in the Orient. There are people, as I said, all over the U.S. There are people all over Europe. There are people all over. I'm told that there are African people who are doing it. In Asia, there are people in Guam. It's been in the Philippines. It's been in Japan. There are a lot of different places where this art has been. And what is amazing about it is that it started off with this one man, a few of his friends, and then extrapolated from there.
Yeah, in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was kind of weird because Hawaii was the perfect place for something like this to exist because it was the largest concentration of armed forces personnel from the American military west of the San Francisco. And because of that, you had all of these guys there, like thousands and thousands of guys.
Yeah, you're mentioning it to me where basically they would kind of create a couple of things and then place their girlfriend in a bar or something like that and purposely get into a fight, use a new skill, and then go back to the other guys to say, so it worked.
Well, yeah. I was reading.
So it literally is it originates as a street fighting martial art. There's no like Zen in the mountain stuff. This is just like...
actually, it's kind of funny because originally that's exactly what it was. As they became more and more mainstream, there was a desire to become accepted by more and more mainstream people. But the people who did mainstream stuff weren't really street fighters. They were guys who, went in their back garden.
Define a couple of mainstream ones. What's the mainstream one?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, you say people who are more mainstream.
Oh, okay, like Taekwondo.
Okay. Oh,
Shotokan karate.
Gotcha.
Arts that,
the big four names that everybody who's just like, when they're like, hey, what? Don't you know my brother knows? Insert the name in pop culture everyone can think of. Karate's the biggest name in pop culture to make a reference to.
But for example,
fighting.
Karate, in 1926, there was a big shift. They had taken all of what they called the jitsus, which are techniques, and they created do. So everything went from karate jitsu, jujitsu, kyujitsu to do, like kyudo, judo, karate do, which meant do means like a way of life, but not just a way of life, but a way of perfecting character. So it no longer mattered whether or not you were actually very good at the art, though that was kind of important to the people who practiced it, but that was less important than perfecting your character. So if you were you could go and say, yes, my perfection as a human being is more important than my perfection of this punch kick, be able to beat you up stuff. Whereas in Kajukenbo, they were very much into the beat you up stuff first, and whether or not you were a really ace of a guy was less important. Because, they were police officers too, so they knew that we all have lots of defects as human beings. But what happened is that they had this great martial art. For example, if you have like your half a dozen guys who are wanting to be a really kick-ass martial art, great. And they start teaching it, and then they start teaching their friends' kids and more kids and other people. And so some of these kids aren't psychopaths, and so they all want to learn how to do martial arts, but they don't want to learn how to do it in a, I went out last night, man, and I knocked this guy's teeth down his throat. I'm really great. That's not very sociable. So people started going, well, how do we do it? Well, we should enter tournaments. And but if you go out and beat the people up in a tournament, then it's not thought of as a very, very neighborly. No. And so one of the things that you do in a martial arts tournament is something called a form or a kata. And Kajukenbo didn't really have any of those at the beginning. There was a system of Okinawan karate that had something called the Nihanshi forms.
Yeah.
And they took these apart and kind of recreated Kajukenbo forms out of most of them. I've seen the Kajukenbo forms. I honestly don't practice all of the Kajukenbo forms. There's some of them that I think I would never practice if you paid me.
Because they're impractical?
No, because I don't like them.
Oh, okay.
But
at least there's enough of the martial art for you to pick and choose, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys. Nowadays, with the advent of MMA, there are some people who never practice forms. And nobody sits around going, oh, those guys are not really martial artists because, well, they could beat the crap out of me, but they're
not.
Like
a guitar player, like not practicing scales, like not doing guitar warm-ups that they would do in the 1940s or 50s.
But it's not even so much that. It's more like, oh, you're not doing bluegrass.
Yeah. Oh, you're not a real guitar player.
Yeah, you're not a real guitar player. It's like what happened was that because they were being involved in a larger organizational thing, it made it difficult for them to do more than that. Like for example, if you wanted to be in a tournament, in some tournaments like Kyokushinkai karate, which is a style formed by a guy by the name of Masatatsu Oyama, a very famous karateka from Japan, actually originally from Korea, but a Japanese guy who created something called Kyokushin, means one heart style.
Yeah.
Anyway, their thing was full contact. They were not allowed punching in the head, but they would punch the crap out of each other's body and kick each other in the leg and the head. You could do knockouts and everything like that. But between every time you had a fight, you had to go off and break something to show that you still had the power. It wasn't just that you weren't just a...
Is that where the board...
No, it wasn't there. No, that's called Timishiwara. But that's not where it came from, but they did a lot of that. But they were into breaking bricks and smashing things. So after every fight, you had to smash something.
Yeah.
And so that would mean that you not only had to manifest the ability to fight, but you had to manifest the ability to break things. And I think in some styles, they would insist that you did a form as well as fight.
Okay.
So they would look at your form, and if you couldn't do a form very well, they wouldn't let you fight anyway.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like this weird thing. But that's the thing, Kajukenbo guys. Now where some of us are noted highly for our ability to do forms. There are a lot of Kajukenbo guys who win in the tournament circuit, win form stuff. There are kung fu people who are Kajukenbo people. There are karate people. Kajukenbo has all these faces that represent different things. There's actually 4 major facets of the art. One's a kung fu based art. One's kind of like half kung fu, half karate. One of them is more karate stylish thing, but it's all Kajukenbo. And the idea being effective self-defense is the primary goal. But for a lot of people, that goal is secondary to their ability to win a karate tournament on the weekend.
Once again, let's try to go for something positive to go out on.
I was very positive, I think.
Very positive. Yeah, okay. So the family tree, anyway, thank you, Claudia, for asking us this. Because I was coming here today, I'm like, if we don't talk about Ozzy, I got nothing. Hang on. He had a part 2 of his question. So let's try to get that in. Maybe you want to answer it, maybe you won't. Well, and if that case, I'll just cut it. 2, what do you think of the hype surrounding Krav Maga in the last couple of years?
Krav
Maga. Do you think it's warranted?
Well, not practicing Krav Maga, no, of course I don't think it's warranted. It's just the next one in a long line of martial arts that everybody thought was going to be the art that's going to take over and destroy everything else. In the early, Judo was very popular in the 50s.
Yeah.
In fact, there's in Hollywood, which is kind of like the wellspring of most of the things we know, because if things happen in Hollywood, they go into popular media like TV and stuff, and they come out. So things like Judo were popularized in various shows. I Love Lucy, things like that were big shows. That was kind of like the big show that everybody watched in the 50s. And but she also practiced karate. And she not herself, but there was a guy named Ed Parker who was very big in his day for what he would do. And then
I've heard of Ed Parker and Elvis Presley books.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So Ed Parker was a big propagator of Hawaii of techniques. He actually had a Kempo background. He had studied Kajukenbo for a short period of time, but not when I say short period of time, I mean like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But he had studied the other styles a long time, and so he was a totally legit guy. But he moved to California and became the guy to the stars.
Yeah.
So karate came in and kind of supplanted judo as the big art being practiced by everybody in California or in Hollywood. And then karate was practiced a long time, and then in the 70s it became kung fu. And I say kung fu. Kung fu doesn't really reflect one particular art, but there's all these arts. But it became the catchphrase because of the David Carradine show. Kung fu was very, very big. A lot of people don't realize this. This was actually a script idea that Bruce Lee had.
Yeah.
And he did it hoping it was to be a vehicle for him. He had originally done that thing. He was Kato on the Green Hornet.
Yeah.
They were not there. I think it was only a season or two long, but
About 2 seasons.
Okay, 2 seasons long. But anyway,
Actually, it might have been 1.
I don't remember.
If Batman only lasted 3 years, Green Hornet did not last.
And Green Hornet was at the same time. And
yeah.
Actually, Batman, Robin supposedly fought Bruce Lee, but as Kato.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, there's this. I'll fill in that gap because that's something I know in pop culture. Basically, Burt Ward in his own right actually is a martial artist, and
well, actually, he wasn't. He is now, but he wasn't. It was all BS. The guys, the PR guys had said, yeah. Burt Ward is, and in those days. Bruce Lee was in his big days of disproving all these guys who were full of it. He wanted to make sure that people who were fighting actually said they could fight. So he was incorporating all sorts of new things into his training to make fighting a reality. Anyway, so Burt Ward was a nice guy, but they'd put him up as a high guy. And so they realized when Bruce Lee came around that he knew nothing. And so they got him on an accelerated program, and I think he got up to a brown belt level.
Okay.
And the only reason I know this was because, of course, I read these black belt magazines like they were Bibles in those days.
Yeah.
And this stuff was reported monthly.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Just because there's always the truth, and Dad nor I am Burt Ward nor Bruce Lee, so I'll give the opposition like quote or whatever that Burt Ward in his own right learned had some stuff. He had a black belt in some other discipline that I don't know, because if that doesn't do it, I don't give a shit. But anyway, Bruce Lee and his wife and Burt Ward and his wife were neighbors in the same complex. And he's just like, yeah, well, on the show, like, there's been these rumors that I made this big deal out of, like, Robin losing to Kato or something like that. But it's like, it wasn't like that. And I don't know. You should have saw what we sparred like when the cameras weren't rolling. Now, if you want to believe that or you don't want to believe that, that's all good. I mean, I know Dad certainly doesn't fucking believe it. But I don't know. It doesn't matter. We're not Bruce. Look, we're not Burt Ward.
Just think of it this way. If, you know...
Dad and I are fighting.
Yeah. No, but think of it this way. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It has to do with more like, if I'm a guy and I'm talking about my conquests of Hollywood starlets, and my name is Rock Hudson, and everybody thinks that I'm having sex with all of these women all over Hollywood. It's only 20 or 30 years later that it turns out that, hey, I'm gay.
Okay.
So that's the same thing. It's like, of course, you're going to have guys who are going to try and put up their stuff because it makes it sound much better. You know, what happened? Oh, I killed them all. I mean, the stories I've heard about myself, you know, I look askance when I hear them. I'm like, my God. Well, I never did that. But it doesn't mean anything because it's just creating that legend around you. I mean, Bruce Lee didn't do all the things that people say that he did. Nobody ever has done all these things. I mean,
like, one time I heard, like, oh, yeah, one time Bruce Lee jumped over a 9-foot fence because someone was trying to rape his wife. I'm like... No.
Exactly. Or, oh, yeah, he went out and he took 50 guys and he had 2 shots left in his gun and they all stood in one line and he shot them all with one bullet. And then he went and got the bullet and put it in his mouth and chewed it and then put it back in the gun and he shot it again. It's like, huh? Yeah, that's kind of.
And this one time, all he had was a bow staff, and he took down like a dozen, 400 agents that all looked the same.
That was on your video game.
Oh no, that was the Matrix. No. That was the second Matrix. One time he had to take a ring to Mordor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but I mean that's the thing about it. We just have a lot of people who get so invested in what it's supposed to be or what they think it should be that it doesn't matter what the truth is. It doesn't really matter. I mean, people have an idea. I mean, you hear stories about people, like the people who's trained with Bruce Lee. I'm very fortunate to have had a very positive relationship with Guru Dan Inosanto for the past, as long as I've been doing Cali, since 81. I have had the pleasure of having met him. And I've trained with him for a bit. And you hear stories about people who weren't there and what they did with Bruce Lee. I mean, like it's so absurd. Not that they knew Bruce Lee, but people start making like ridiculous, outrageous claims about what happened in any situation. Yeah, man. Yeah, me and my boys, like we went and we took them all out. Look, the one reality is in a real fight, nobody wins. People survive. Other people don't survive. That's what happens in a fight. It's not like, oh, I won. It's because, you only win something when you actually win something. I.e., if you're in a prize fight, if you're a boxer, you could win a title because that title is up for grabs. But you're not actually winning something. You get face punched in and your face looks like it's like a pincushion for a couple of days. Well, maybe not so great. Maybe less positive.
By technicality, you're the winner and your eyes are punched shut.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, yeah, I won.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a bunch of stuff like that. So it's like there are people who talk and they say stuff and you just have to learn to ignore them. And, it actually, what it should do is make you realize that there are so many things that are not necessarily true that you just have to learn what the truth is on your own and make your own decisions from that.
Okay, so that's your answer to that question that he had that I can't pronounce.
Okay, Krav Maga. Krav Maga. Let's get back to that original thing because I think I got off on a bit of a tangent there. Krav Maga, I say supposedly because I have never been in the Israeli army, so I have no idea, was supposedly created by this guy and was put together from all of these arts. From what I gather, he was a judo man and whatever. And I say whatever because I don't know what the situation is. I'm sure all these people who are Krav Maga practitioners are going, oh, yeah, no. But Krav Maga, there are some really awesome practitioners of that art, and there are some less than awesome practitioners of that art, just like everywhere else.
Okay.
And in everything else. But what they will do, in a lot of cases, is that they'll go in somewhere and they'll train with a martial art. They'll train some new martial art that they'll come in. And then that technique, they will not acknowledge where it came from. They'll just start teaching that technique as Krav Maga. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I just think that's kind of unfair. For example, when the Gracies will say, well, we do Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And I say, where's that from? They'll say, well, they got it from this guy, Count Maeda, who taught their grandfather or father, or whoever's talking, to the first Gracies, Carlos and Helio Gracie learned this from Count Maeda, this guy who was a judo man who had moved to Brazil in the early 1900s. And, they'll say that because they know that what they did to it afterwards by just taking it in and restructuring it and then training it like lunatics for as long as they did. Anyway, but the whole idea behind Krav Maga is that it's well marketed. I mean, they had it in that movie starring Jennifer Lopez, and when she was a wife or something like that, had been terrorized, and she learned Krav Maga to defend herself, and of course she successfully used Krav Maga. Is it any better or any worse than anything else? Probably not. Is it well publicized? Yes. They must have a publicity firm that has been working on their behalf. And
it's called her left and right butt cheek.
Well, no, because those then.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of, if you have an advocate who happens to have a stage upon which they can base their stuff, like Kung Fu. Kung Fu, nobody knew what Kung Fu was. It was, people like me knew what it was because I'd been reading those karate magazines. But most people, you hear the word Kung Fu, they went, what? Is that like Kung Pao chicken?
Yeah.
And, the reason they would not know it was because there was no publicity.
Did you just call me something?
Exactly. But there's what you have, Krav Maga is just one of those arts that, it's the newest in a long line. I mean, who knows what's going to be next? And because there's going to be a next one. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very successful now. Krav Maga is, the problem is that if you practice something and you're not willing to bring it to a stage or to a place where you can contest it against anybody else doing everything else, when that's one of the things I have to admit. I mean, the things that the Gracies did to make that possible, because it wasn't just like boxers boxing, kickboxers kickboxing, wrestlers wrestling, judokaing. It was anybody could do anything they wanted to the other guy. So there was a grappling section, a clinching section, and a striking section. So you could kick the guy in the leg. You could kick him in the head. You could punch him in the head. They tried restricting striking. So, for example, if a guy was on his back, you couldn't do a soccer kick to his head, but you could kick him in the ribs. You could knee him. You couldn't knee him in the face. You couldn't elbow. You couldn't, there are certain things you weren't allowed doing to the guy when he was on the ground. Like you're not allowed kneeing the face. You're not allowed doing this. And just about everything else is illegal. I remember the last time something like this happened in the 70s. Kung Fu guys from Hong Kong challenged Muay Thai fighters from Thailand.
Okay.
And they were going, oh yeah, we're going to. And so the Thai fighters were actually a little bit reluctant to fight them because they didn't know, they'd heard stories. You see the movies, there are all these Kung Fu guys flying up on leaves and, all this wire work. And they were doing this stuff and it was pretty impressive. And it's because it was a movie. But as soon as they got in the ring, I think the longest Kung Fu guy lasted about a minute and a half.
Okay.
Because the Thai boxers were used to training they would kick people in the legs, so they would fall down and not be able to walk properly.
Yeah.
Or they would knee them in the ribs, breaking various ribs. I mean, there's actually deaths in Thai boxing from people getting their ribs broken and the ribs puncturing. It's more not because they got killed by getting kneed, but they got killed and a rib was broken and they didn't treat the rib properly and they went sent home and then the broken rib probably punctured a lung and they bled out internally. But by and large...
Beautiful.
But people still died. And so they get elbows in the head. I mean, in Thai boxing, you're allowed to elbow in the head. You're allowed to kick knee in the face. You're allowed kneeing the body. You're allowed kicking the leg. You're allowed doing that. There's a certain clinching where you're grabbing the guy called a plum and you can throw him on the ground and stuff like that. So it's a pretty rough stuff. So the Kung Fu guys, all of whom practice probably 2 or 3, even 4 hours a week, were fighting against guys whose conditioning level was really high and who were training, if they were Thai boxing, they were running at 6 in the morning. And then training all morning, then resting and training all afternoon. But they would fight almost every weekend because there are about 3 or 4 big stadiums in Thailand and then all these smaller areas that you could learn to fight with. So when the Kung Fu guys tried fighting them, they basically didn't have a chance because the guy's conditioning level was so high. But the idea was that, hey, these Kung Fu guys are so awesome, like they were in the Sheldon Temple, and they would like stand in a horse dance for like hours and hold jars full of water in their fingertips and they would be like awesome and they would crush you and come in and they'd put their, like that thing in, what's it called, Temple of Doom, the Indiana Jones, and they rip your heart out. So there are all sorts of arts like that'll claim to do that, that actually won't actually be able to do it.
Yeah.
So therein lies the thing about Krav Maga. It's one more art. It doesn't compete. So anything they do, it works or it doesn't work based on the ability of the person executing it and the ability of the person who they're fighting. But they're probably not going to fight somebody who actually knows something, because most of those people don't really fight on the street.
Yeah.
And if you're arguing with some guy over his girlfriend that you wanted to take out on a date instead of him, and you beat the guy up, you can say, Krav Maga, man, this is awesome. But,
but not mention that you got about 200 pounds on the guy.
well,
and about 3 feet.
Yeah, well, yeah. But that's but Krav Maga it's an interesting art, but it's it hasn't. I don't think it has proven itself. But everybody goes and says, oh yeah, but it's the art chosen by the Israeli military. And it actually reminds me of something. This friend of mine telling me a story when he was a captain on a destroyer. He said there was a huge amount of people on a destroyer, and he, there's a Navy SEAL that an officer, a Navy SEAL, was on this boat, and they were having a boxing tournament, and the Navy SEAL liked to keep in shape by doing boxing. So anyway, they had this big boxing tournament, and everybody was going, wow, Navy SEAL's going to fight, because everybody, of course, had heard Navy SEALs, that go out and they chew steel and shoot out nails, that type of thing. Well, everybody figured this guy was doing it. The guy went in a boxing tournament and supposedly got pretty badly beaten, because there are a lot of other guys who are boxers on these ships, and some of them were really, really good, and they trained every day. Anyway, this guy was just doing it for fun, and he got the crap beat out of him. Mm-hmm. And everybody was going to him afterwards, man, what happened? What happened?
I thought you were a Navy SEAL. You're part of the X-Men. What the hell?
Yeah, exactly. And so his response was, look, if I need to use empty hand techniques, something as horrible has happened. If I'm on a mission and I need to use my empty hand techniques, something has gone wrong. Because I use a machine pistol and a pistol and most highly technological weapons known to man in my missions. I do not use my ability to chop somebody and punch them in the nose. And that type of thing, because, as good as Navy SEALs may be, they are humans. I mean, they can do things for longer than you or I, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
But, the fact is, you can get individual people who are as good. I mean, of all the people who get into the Navy SEALs, they're just that. And then once they get in there, they're trained to be the people that they want. And they're based on an awful lot of things. Their ability to work in a team, the ability to build trust amongst a small group of people. There's a whole lot of things, a lot of factors that aren't just like, well, he scored 8 on this test, he should be a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
No, it's that's part of it.
A lot of
and
factors go into it.
But then you have these guys who, just because you happen to be really good at something, i.e., back to the Krav Maga thing, just because something may have been used by somebody in the Israeli military has no qualification as to whether or not it's successful. If I'm in my tank, my ability to do Krav Maga is really unimportant.
Yeah, I got you. Good point. All right, that's a good point to send off on. All right, thank you very much, Claudio, for your questions, because you gave us a show. And, thanks to you, all these people around the world who actually will chime into this will know the secret origins of the Kajukenbo family tree produced by Philip Jonah each and every year. Where can people buy these family trees?
Well, I have a page on Facebook called the Kajukenbo Family Tree, and I'm contactable through there. I also have on something called the Kajukenbo Cafe, which is kajukenbocafe.com. Every year, actually, I produce a major one every year, but I've learned in the past, and because I have a computer program that will work for me this way, people contact me at montrealmartialarts@yahoo.ca. And if they want to have contributions to the family tree, they can contact me that way, or they can obtain one from me.
All right. Thank you very much for listening to Tuhon and Son. MontrealMartialArts.com is Gamma's official website. And, the phone number here is 514-281-9928. Dad, you have a bunch of disciplines here, and a trial class is free. So if anyone's intimidated, saying, like, I don't want to bust a bunch of money to get my butt kicked, well, you can come get your butt kicked the first time for free, and generally you don't get your butt kicked.
No.
No? And if you go to MontrealMartialArts.com, seriously, go to it. It's cool. It's got pictures and stuff. You can learn the information of what we teach here and when the schedule is, and more importantly, you can learn about the upcoming Dan Inosanto seminar. And Dan Inosanto, he's a pretty cool guy. He's also one of the few people certified by Bruce Lee. You know, Bruce Lee's only picked a couple of people that says, I'm going to make you an instructor. You're good enough to teach my stuff. And Dan was one of those few people. How many people did Bruce?
3 people.
3 people. That's 1 out of 3. All the Musketeers. And Danny's coming to our school, so you can meet him. If you take the seminar, you can actually meet him and you
train
can
with him.
You train with him. God, that's like the Kevin Bacon game. That's 2 degrees of separation from Bruce Lee. That's amazing. All right, thank you for listening to Tuhon and Son. I'm Ryan Stick Gelida.
And I'm Tuhon Philip Jelena.
And yep, this is a long, this is a long interview. Actually, no, I've been listening to podcasts that are like 2.5 hours long. The trick is, people, if you're watching it on YouTube and you're like, I don't want to watch YouTube for an hour, look in the description. There's a link to our Spreaker account where you could download this, put it on your phone, get on a treadmill, and listen to that. And you're like, I'll stop running as soon as these guys shut up. I've been running for over an hour. All right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.